Good morning, everyone. Shall we start? Not yet. Okay. Okay, we'll go ahead and start. So, good morning, everyone. I'm David Kuettel from Google.
And I'm John Giannopolulos from ATypI.
First, we'd like to thank all of you. We're so excited to present today on the result of all of your hard work, the adoption of web fonts across the web, which you all made possible. And second, we're really excited to start the ATypI conference off with a bang. We've collected some really interesting numbers. Absolutely delighted to share with you. Ready?
Perhaps the first point to talk about is, so why do the analysis? We understand that the industry has come a long way over the last 10, 15 years with respect to fonts on the web, but we wanted to determine with some really hard numbers just how far we've come, especially over the last 12 to 36 months. We wanted to share that industry information to everybody in the room, and as you'll see later in the presentation on a public basis, the results are really astounding, even to us who have been following this pretty closely over the last 12 to 24 months. And so with that, maybe we can move forward.
Okay, so first, what is a web font? So specifically what we're going to be talking about today is fonts downloaded by the browser. And so here's an example of Google Maps Preview using web fonts for the text on info cards and maps. And the CSS ties it all together, and through Chrome Inspect Element, you can see the browser downloading fonts. That's what we're going to be talking about today.
Now, the industry has been tracking fonts for a while. In particular, ATypI.org is a public source that one can go and they do lots of trend analysis. The analysis pretty much focuses on the top 1,000 globally trafficked websites. They look at the home pages of those websites and in particular look for signs that a web font has been actually used. It doesn't really do a great job for providing additional detail, like what type of integration. Was it self-hosted or was it using a service? Which fonts are being used? What are the most popular? So forth and so on. And so that led us to want to do more. If we look at the adoption rate based on HTTP archive, it's 27%. That is pretty fantastic, considering that just 3 years ago, if you looked at the adoption curve, it was probably closer to 1 to 2%. Probably last year, we could see 10 to 15%. And then in the last 12 months, we've seen adoption rates go up to 27%. That's pretty astounding. That really is great.
And next, we're going to talk about the new approaches in 2013 to measuring web font adoption.
Well, just before we get there, perhaps, to the Google analysis, I'd like to tell you a little bit about fonts.com and some of the work that we've been doing in crawling the web and trying to understand similar kinds of information, but maybe go a little bit deeper. We have our homegrown crawler technology that looks at the global 1 million home pages, and that's a much broader data set. We try to go deeper. We look at the HTML and look for signs of web font activity, very similar to HTTP archive and others, but we do try to understand much, much more. And based on that analysis, we're looking at a relatively similar number to what HTTP archive has come up with, at 28%, but it's across a much broader data set. You're looking at 1,000 home pages versus 1 million home pages.
And then to summarize a little bit and to review, so far we've been talking about the adoption of web fonts across home pages. And so here's 2 domains, for example, that are in the Alexa top 1 million. You have WordPress.com, which is using web fonts on their homepage, and Google.com, a really large domain, but it's using web fonts, but not on the homepage. So next we covered the HTTP archive.org analysis, where over the top 1,000 web these are home pages, we saw 27% adoption. Then over the top 1 million from fonts.com. But however, over the years, what we've seen is that homepage usage isn't necessarily, it doesn't tell you the complete story. So when websites roll out web fonts, they typically start with leaf pages. And so through a deeper analysis, we thought we could uncover all of these integrations and sort of get a glimpse of where the industry is going. So with that, and for comparison, if we compare the two, the fonts.com analysis was 1,000 times greater than the the ATypI archive one. And with Google Fonts, we wanted to analyze the entire web. And so that was another 10,000 X increase. And what you can see, I mean, you would expect the numbers to be higher because we're picking up integrations off leaf pages. And some of these domains can be really big. So YouTube.com, for example, is 100 million web pages. As we go further out, they drop off, but we're talking about a lot of web pages. And so then to cover the Google Fonts analysis, the sample size is well over 10 billion web pages, over 100 million domains. We're going through it, we're using Chrome, we're loading these web pages, we're looking at the fonts that were loaded by the browser. We aggregate all of that through MapReduce. We're storing the results in BigQuery, which is a database in the cloud, and that allows us to discover, find the domains that are using, the ones that aren't, the ones that are experimenting, etc. So with that, through the deeper analysis, and this is over the top 1 million, we see much higher use of web fonts on one or more pages across the domains. So for example, earlier we were seeing 28%, 27% for the top 1,000. Here we're seeing 62% of domains in the Alexa top 1,000 beginning to use web fonts. And so that's just such a strong signal of what's to come. Okay, next, are you ready? In analyzing the entire web, we found well over 1 billion web pages using web fonts, and this is such a significant milestone for the industry that I think we should take just a minute to give the entire industry, all of us, a round of applause. Yeah, this has been in the works for over 20 years. We also found 35 million domains that are using web fonts. And one way to think about this is there's tens of millions of developers, designers, users using web fonts today. And that doesn't get any more exciting for us. So let me turn it back to John.
So that's a wonderful analysis and really deep analysis. And so from all of this introspective looking at the web, we have come up with some, I think, interesting adoption statistics that we'd like to share. Thomas and Amanda from Extenses have looked at similar kinds of data, and they've seen some really interesting adoption stats. First and foremost, the enterprise segment and the implementations across the enterprise over the last 12 months have spiked significantly, especially along the lines of small to medium-sized businesses. At the same time, pan-European support has increased over the last 12 months to an exponential 5x from what it was the previous year. And that the demands for responsive design are driving the adoption of web fonts. There really isn't any other better way to do it than to use real fonts on the web, and I think they're seeing the same kinds of things. Now, on fonts.com, we've also seen font requests increase dramatically over the last 24 months. But in particular, over the last 6 months, we've seen a market increase, 30% web font views rise of the service over the last 6 months. And that's a pretty amazing statistic and a pretty amazing number. You're talking about billions and billions and billions of font requests being asked for every single day. And we think that that's really exciting.
Okay. Next, one of my favorite stats. Are you ready, John?
I'm not doing it.
So what's really fun is as adoption has really taken off, it becomes really hard to relate to the numbers. And so to put it all in context, here's the most viewed video on YouTube. Within the past year, it broke 1 billion views. And that was such a significant milestone for the video industry. But if we compare size Gangnam Style video with Steve Madison's open,
Go Fox!
This is over 80 times the number of total views. But what's even more exciting is Open Sans is being viewed at a rate of 15 billion views per month. Sorry, site. Here's one thing that we wanted to spend more time analyzing, but we didn't get a chance to fully analyze this year, perhaps next year. But it's basically font views from around the world by country. One thing that clearly stands out, though, is North and South America, Western Europe, a bit of Russia were the early adopters. And there is a very long tail, but what this also shows is that there's a tremendous opportunity to bring web fonts to the rest of the world. So hopefully we'll be able to report on this more next year.
It's also interesting to take a look at what's been happening to Flash, which has been a very traditional way of creating rich content. We've seen sites with Flash. By the way, this comes from ATypI archive. It's one of the trend analyses that they do. And you'll see that there's been a decline at a rate of probably about 1% per quarter over the last 24 months. If you try to compare and contrast that to what's been happening with web fonts, you see sort of the two lines, the red line being Flash and the blue line being web fonts. The dotted line in the middle represents where we are today. So as of October of 2013. I thought it would be fun to extrapolate a little bit based on reasonable assumptions to see if there's a crossover point of where Flash and web fonts will intersect. And I see that sometime next year, probably around the May timeframe. What we also, in looking at the data and looking at the analysis on these sites, is that there was a spike in probably the June-July timeframe earlier this year. We're not quite sure what happened there, but we saw a significant spike in web font use, the amount of HTTP requests, and we think that that's kind of where the chasm might have been. Yes?
Was that around Google I/O?
No, I think Google I/O was earlier, wasn't it, in the year? Maybe it was Google I/O. Maybe it was a Google site. It spiked the web. Imagine that. Anyway, let's...
Okay. So next we'll cover some opportunities ahead. And again, these are thoughts from around the industry. So first we have extenses, where as we've talked about before, there's a tremendous opportunity ahead to bring web fonts to the rest of the market. They've seen an explosion in usage recently, and they're excited to take that to all languages. Next, we have fonts.com, where there are a few key web font adoption accelerators that are coming. So one is as websites move from graphics to web fonts for their headlines. And then next, as the industry converges around WAF2, which delivers better compression, lower latency, and also the opportunity to streamline and simplify integrations. Next, we have Google Fonts, where we see adoption exploding as the lingering technology issues are all resolved. For example, rendering, compression, loading the fonts earlier, they're all in progress, but they're going to take time to resolve. And so we would easily project well over 10 billion web pages using web fonts from across the industry within 2 years. And next, the best part, we're really excited.
That wasn't good enough. There's more.
We're really excited to announce that the database that we built up in analyzing the web, we went through a rigorous privacy review, we got the senior VP approval, and we're excited to make it available today to all of you. What is it? Well, it's basically a database in the cloud that you can use to query and drill down by so many different dimensions, domain, integrations, and more. And here, for example, is a query. It's like, say I wanted to find where Source Sans Pro was being used as web font across the web. Show me some example pages where the web font was used to render more than 50% of the text on the page. And then also just a glimpse of the schema. So you can filter by rank and so much more. Then the results of this query. So here's some example pages where Source Sans Pro is being used. And then there's a short link on how to access the data via BigQuery. And write it down real quick. Okay. Next, on to our summary.
So hopefully, as you've seen, the rate of adoption has been really amazing, especially over the last 12 to 24 months, and we think that that's extremely exciting.
And as we presented earlier, web fonts are now being used across 1 billion web pages, which is a significant milestone for the entire industry, for all of us.
The majority of the top websites are also experimenting, which I think really paves the way for a bright future, because as we all know, experimentation is where things start before they move on to the main landing pages of these websites. So the future, we think, is really, really bright. But we're not done.
Yeah, we're not done. And so one call to action would be to support initiatives that make the web better. So this would be things like WAF2, your browser, and everything. And with that, thank you so much, everyone. Would like to, any questions?
There's a question down at the red.
Yeah, hi. With the analysis that you did, where you get the millions and billions of numbers, is that, do you guys look at CSS code, or do you guys, like, what I'm getting at is, do these fonts include, do these so-called web fonts, do they include, Verdana and Arial and Comic Sans and Georgia and stuff like that?
That's a great question.
Do you want to run the microphone back? So I can take this. And basically, with the large analysis, we were loading well over 10 billion web pages through Chrome. And what we were looking at is the reference resources. So did the browser download a font over the web?
So the system fonts that you're referring to were not looked at. So if a page is using
Nonetheless, they are actually being used as web fonts, which they have always been, really. When you think about it, except they weren't in CSS code.
So for this talk, we're defining web fonts as using the at font face snippet.
But we're not
And the
going to
font.
that font.
Well, if the browser downloaded Verdana over the web as a font, and you saw it show up in Chrome Inspect element, then we would count it.
Right.
Do you think that that's happening a lot, though?
I think it's got to have some percentage in there, especially with fonts like Helvetica, because Helvetica ships with a Mac but doesn't ship with Windows, and Mac designers would want if they want to use Helvetica on their website, they just take their copy from the Mac, put it in their at font face, and then the Windows users would actually download it automatically, and they would see the website the way it's supposed to see.
So that's interesting. We can refine that.
Stuff like that. There are some fonts that ship with Windows but don't ship with the Mac because they never licensed them, Apple never licensed them, and vice versa, right? So I expect there's some percentage of that. Maybe it's not considerable, but I'd expect some percentage to be standard fonts that are cranking up the numbers.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions? Yes, one more, right?
We're running out of time.
Final question?
So, blogs were by far the earliest adopters of web fonts. In the early days of web fonts, 80, 90% of all integrations were blogs. What category is kind of number two, and what category do you think is lagging the most, if you have any kind of breakdown?
That's a fantastic question, and I didn't break it down in advance of this talk. Some of the really large-scale integrations that we see now, however, are properties like Maps and Play, Google+. The really exciting ones that are coming up are the ads integrations, where it's billions and billions of views per day. But we didn't break it down. Maybe for the next talk. That's a great question. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. I think we're about run out of time. Appreciate your coming out this morning and giving us an opportunity to talk. Thank you.